but at the same time, there's also an immense amount of wealth inequality, which is very apparent in how racial differences are presented in this county. And, I think that there's many smaller forms of racism that are so ingrained into our daily lives. And I think that comes in so many different forms. And being able to experience that in a town like Jackson, I think helps also put it in a context of the nation as a whole as well.
Wonderful. Talking about some of the underhanded or backhanded racism that, I know you and I have both experienced in this community and so many other people have, can you give any insight or experiences you've had just to kind of explain to someone who might not have ever had that happen to them themselves, what it looks like to be you? And what it looks like when people are showing that microaggression.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely super interesting, this topic of conversation, and I think something that really needs to be brought up more in the general conversations. In so many ways, the face of hate has changed so much over time, even just comparatively to like the Jim Crow era. How we treat other people and the injustices that are embedded within our system, they're not gone. They've just changed their disguise over time. And I think specifically here in Teton County, there's a common experience of not being able to fully explain your perspective. And this is something that I've experienced and something that has been, a learning lesson and trying to move through in my own life, of having a certain perspective because of just who you are and the things you've seen and the way your skin or your hair, or whatever it may be, looks. And just trying to explain that experience to someone who hasn't. And I think that that is, an issue for all people, regardless of anything, is trying to express our corner of the universal human experience and what exactly that looks like. And sort of going hand in hand with that, with issues of, cultural appropriation. And it's just so difficult sometimes to explain the perspective that you're coming from. And I think that that's one thing that is experienced a lot in this town. But even beyond that, and just like personal feelings, I think there's a lot of cemented injustice that we see a lot. Even breaking down things like, if you have an ethnic sounding name, you could be less likely to be able to have certain opportunities. There's a restriction on your ability to sort of go and move through different and have that sort of upward mobility. And that's definitely something that is restricted when you're a person of color. And I think that those issues, regardless of how we in Teton County try to approach them, is incredibly real and incredibly apparent. And even issues of, feeling like you are never quite accepted into the spaces that you're in, that you're always just a little bit off, that you're never quite fully in a group, that you're too ethnic, that you're too different somehow, whether it be the way you speak or anything like that. And I think that that continuous experience, having that filter over your entire life, creates challenges within and of itself.
I agree 100%. For those who are watching who might not understand what we mean by microaggressions, in this case, we're talking about racism that may not be as open as you would expect. There are a lot of times where someone might have a experience where someone has been racist to them, and it doesn't always have to be someone trying to be physically violent with them or calling them a slur. Sometimes it is something as simple as feeding into a stereotype. Like when I walk into a store, sometimes here on the square, and an employee follows me around the entire store. There's lots of different ways that people can portray bigoted or racist views without being extremely aggressive in doing so. So that's kind of what she's talking about, just how dealing with that for long periods of time it shapes who you are, it molds you, and it does have an effect on you. I believe anyone living their life who is not able to do so as openly and freely as they believe is going to have trouble somewhere, because you have to be able to live your truth. So my next question for you is kind of talking about that. As a child, for me personally, microaggressions were very extreme, especially in classrooms or with other kids, sometimes parents. In this community specifically, what do you remember experiencing, and what do you think would be a good way to start breaking down some of those borders?
Mm-hmm. Um, I guess the first memory that always comes to mind when I think about stuff like this is, you know, I'm Native American, and it's usually a standard part of any American education that you cover a certain portion of Indigenous history and periods of time when the United States government and Indigenous tribes were locked in conflict with one another. And I have memories of, there would be a video playing on a screen with Indigenous music over the background and kids laughing because, oh, that sounds weird. What is that? And, generally being in many classroom environments where I was the only person of color in that room and having a perspective on something and physically not being able to describe that to someone, or common sayings of like, oh, well, you lost the battle, you should just accept it, you got colonized, sucks. And just general stuff like that where you're just like gripping your chair and you're like, okay. uh, for me, those are always the first memories that come to mind. But I think that as a community, embracing a lot of the diversity that we do have in this town, because there is a substantial amount, and there is a very long history of people that passed through this area, and they were not all white. This land was traditionally Indigenous land, and it was at one point or another promised to certain treaties and was supposed to be reservation land. And I think that embracing that history and also embracing the truly diverse community we have here is so important. We're not as isolated as we think we are. And I think that that is proof in what this organization is doing now, and across the country what protests like the Black Lives Matter movement are doing. It's proving to one another that we are not walking this path alone, that we are not alone in these experiences and in what this means. And I think really embracing that community aspect, and for our white allies, also taking extreme accountability for what it means to benefit from privilege and what it means to have internalized racism and internalized beliefs, deconstructing those and acting is so important. One thing that I always point out when I discuss this is that our town council is 100% white. Every single member on that council is white, which is not a reflection of the racial diversity we have in this town. And I think recognizing our privilege, recognizing where we're lacking, and action. Compassion and action are the two most fundamental things to change, I believe. It doesn't matter how much work you do internally if you're not putting that forth into the world. So that means voting, that means talking to your representatives, that means having really difficult conversations with the people in your own life. Because unfortunately, we all have that energy around us, people who don't understand, and taking accountability and making it your personal duty to educate the people in your life, the people in your community, willing to have those awful gut-wrenching conversations is so important. Across the board, I think there's so many physical actions that can be taken, and I think more than anything, that is the catalyst of change.
That's awesome. I agree 100%. I really love the points that you touched on accountability, because that is so important. Even it's something that we all have to grow up and learn how to do as adults, in general. And I think you're right. It's time we take it one step further and be accountable about how our words and our actions are affecting things on a much larger scale.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's so very important.
And
I Go ahead.
And in all honesty, that applies to every single person, regardless of race. I think that so often it's almost easy for people of color to accept and internalize a lot of those, stigmas and stereotypes that we have associated with different people, even of your own race. And that's something that, I've personally found myself guilty of many times. And I think really pinpointing that, looking it in the face is so important.
Agreed. I have learned through some great teachers in my life that sometimes one of the hardest things you can do is listen, especially when it's something that is emotional or sensitive to you. But it's one of the most important things you can do, because anytime you shut yourself off, you close yourself off to a conversation, you will not learn anything.
Mm-hmm.
And people are learning and starting to accept that you can hear someone out and you can listen and you can learn, even if you don't necessarily agree. There's a difference there, but we shouldn't close ourselves off to those conversations because they are important.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Moving on to Jackson Hole today. I moved here almost 5 years ago, and it's not quite the same as it was when I moved here. You've lived here all your life, so you've been able to see some more progression than I would. But in your perspective, what do you think we can do in this community to maybe help break down some boundaries that are going to be appropriate for this community?
Mm-hmm.
I think to every community, they need to do it in a way that fits that area, because you have to be able to connect with people. So what do you think, what kind of programs would you like to see happen here?
That's an awesome question. And I think in terms of so much about, I think, change is oftentimes extremely similar to like exposure therapy. The more you see people of color, the more you see diverse communities, the more you see people living their 100% honest truth, the more comfortable people get with that, the more familiar it becomes. And I think in many ways, just seeing something repetitively is one of the best ways to, be able to humanize something. So I remember when I was younger, my grandfather, Sonny Tuttle, who he was extremely traditional, loved his culture, and really just held on to that part of himself very strongly. I remember when I was a little girl, there was he would call it a cultural exchange that they actually did at Snow King every year, and it had some of our more traditional dances with it, and depending who was on microphone that year, whether it be my grandfather or my mom, would explain some of the sort of traditional meanings behind that. And we had people not only from our own tribe, but many other tribes as well, from sort of, Plains Indian people. And, I think that form of cultural exchange, being able to show someone your culture with the depth, with the detail, with the, respect that it deserves, that is such an incredibly beautiful and strong way of strengthening a community and creating a more diverse community. So much of Jackson has been defined by our history, with certain parts of the nature that exists here. And I think because of that, we've created a culture that feels white. We are right at the back doorstep of the first national park in the United States, which has some meaning to it and has some depth. And I think that because of things like that, we've created this specific type of culture. But there are also so many other people who have moved here and made this place their home as well. So when I see certain parts of the Latino community with here being able to show and demonstrate and explain and really live their truth of what it means to participate in their culture, that offers an immense amount of strength to this community. And I think across the board, being given a space to do that, being given the opportunity to speak on behalf of yourself and your people in whatever format that is always so strong. So I think that across anything, creating more space for people of color in whatever way that may be, whether that be through political channels, whether that mean on the heads of corporations, because there are so many businesses that exist in this town, and highlighting those, having newspapers that are run by people of color, whatever it is, pushing forward that voice that's something different. And I think opening people up and really showing and being proud of the culture and the people that have made Teton County what it is, it would be so incredibly vital for opening up this sort of stagnant stereotype we've almost created of our town here. Because we're not stagnant, we're as diverse as it gets, I think, in certain ways, but it's just about highlighting that more.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Agreed. I think it's very important to, like you said, create a space for people to live their truth. And, one of the biggest reasons that I think this group all got together was we had found an issue. We had found something that made us feel a certain way with the Black Lives Matter, all of the protests, the riots that were going on. And we came together, all from different backgrounds, all different ethnicities, for one common goal. And one of the biggest goals that I think we have is to empower those minorities to live their truth, because it is so important. Just like you said, when you can empower someone, you have no idea what they'll do, whether it's owning a business or being in charge of some news and media, starting another program where people can also feel more empowered to live their truth, because we consider ourselves in this county to be progressive, which means if we're going to say it, I believe we got to back it up, because actions speak louder than words. Definitely. So, Alex came up with the great idea of the name for this, Let's Get Real, JH, because the reality is we still have work to do. We really do. And I love everything he had to say with that. My next question for you is, what would you like to see as far as our community with those types of events? Do you think we could start like a cultural type of festival? Like, what do you think we could do with that idea as far as what the town would be up to?
I can't think of a single reason why not, in all honesty. If, like you said, if we truly are a town as progressive as we think we are, then, we have the obligation to highlight some of those things. And honestly, having some sort of cross-cultural event to, highlight the communities that are here and highlight those, beautiful aspects of what it means to belong to like a culture or a people or a history is so incredibly important. And honestly, I think the possibilities are endless. That's sort of the beauty of Teton County in many ways, as many issues as we may have. When it comes down to making things happen, when it comes down to having influence, I don't think anything's impossible, truly.
Awesome. I think I agree with you there. I have noticed that a lot of minorities in this area, because like you said, it's such a white space, there's this feeling of discomfort, of exposure when you do live your truth, or when you show up to an event and you're the only one who looks like you. How do you think we could go about kind of, I don't know, maybe even just from one minority to another, helping with that comfort zone of saying it's okay to be here, and we want to start these programs, we want to have you involved, and get them out of their comfort zone a little bit.
I've always been a big believer in the mindset of build it and they will come. I know for me personally, because of the things that I've been involved in my life and the spaces that I've choose to occupy, many of those have been incredibly white spaces. And that's always just, a reality that I accepted because of my own choices. But that being said, when I have been given the opportunity and had people reach out to me. Like, I remember when I first got the phone call from you guys, I was like, wait, what? Wait, you're doing what? And you want me to, like, I was ecstatic, because there was this idea of, okay, this is a community of people who want to see change, who have this, similar ideals and goals as myself, who have also experienced similar experiences as myself. And I was so happy to be able to help in any way that I could. And I think that that's sort of the reality, is that it's easy to feel isolated when you're not seeing anybody on a visual standpoint. So I think that just having the gall to just be able to be like, I'm here, this is who I am, this is what I know, what I've lived through, I think that will attract people who have had similar experiences. And, I truly believe that is sort of an inevitability. Hope is contagious.
Wow, that's awesome. Absolutely amazing. I could talk to you all day because it's just so, it puts this really stupid smile on my face because it
Corey,
is,
we have been talking all day. What are you
we
talking?
have been talking all day, because it is so refreshing to see not just a person of color, but a woman of color speak their truth, because it doesn't happen enough,
Mhm.
especially in an area like that. So it's just so refreshing. So thank you again. I think we're at the point where we're gonna turn it over to some questions, and see if anyone in the audience has anything they want to ask or any comments they'd like to make, just so we can have that open dialogue. If you want to send that in.
Maleah, I have a question.
Hey, Roxana, how's it going?
Good. Great to see you, and thanks for talking and promoting this conversation to the organization. I feel like I'm thinking, why do I feel this momentum now, where before it was like a little more blurred, And I have been thinking, and one of my answers is like, I think now I have white friends, allies who are speaking in the same terms or putting things out that before I haven't heard from white allies. And with that, I think I have gained more strength, being more courageous, like face it in a more frontal way. And I was wondering if you have had similar experience, or do you have other kind of experience that have just promoted the momentum, if you feel any momentum at all now?
No, for sure. I think that honestly, the combination of both the coronavirus and this extreme quarantine that we went through, immediately followed up by the Black Lives Matter protests, which were set records for the largest international turnout for a racially based protest in like human history. And I think seeing that on such an international level, but especially here in the United States, and seeing people my own age, from every age group, from every race, sexuality, gender identity, nationality, background, it was people of every single sect were turning out for these protests, because it was so incredibly clear, sort of at last, the incredible amount of violence that there is in this country, and the ways in which we have directly installed racism into our institutions, and the fact that it was so blatantly clear all of a sudden to the entire country. And I think that there was sort of a ripple that went through people in general that said, this is enough. We're tired of putting up with this. The way in which things are being handled is absolutely unacceptable. And if no one is going to stand and speak up for it, I will. And I think that that really was the message in every single person's heart who showed up to those protests, or who donated, who, signed petitions, who went and like registered to vote because of these events. And at our core, I truly do believe that humans have the tendency to want to group together. We are creatures of tribes. We work best when we are in communities. And for the first time in my life, especially, I felt the most united with every single person in this country. Or a lot of people in this country for the first time in like a while, you know? And, you know, I think that there is a significant portion of that that is due to the support and allyship of white people, and really looking internally and seeing how they benefit from, you know, the systems that are in place and the history that has taken place in this land, in this place. And, you know, that just, I felt so hopeful, like the entire time. Like I was just reinvigorated with this energy that, you know, was just indescribable in so many ways.
Yeah, that is so true. The momentum, I think we got a lot of it from just the extreme explicit exposure, because media now, you can videotape anything and send it out there. And people didn't let it die, which was amazing. You know, they made sure that it went viral. And I think a lot of it has to do with this younger generation, that a lot of these members in this group share, where we were kind of handed a world that we didn't mess up ourselves, and then we were criticized for how we dealt with it, you know? So we have extreme feelings, we have extreme views, and I think we're tired of dealing with it. So we're taking what we know, which is social media, technology, social settings, and we're applying it to try and make a change. Did we have any other questions?
I wanted to chime in just with something. You know, I've lived in the Valley now for about 22 years. And when I first moved to town, there were only a few of us that were ethnic in general here. There were a few Latino people, much less natives. I don't think we had any of the Black community represented at that point in time that I knew of. And so where we've come just in the past 22 years, and certainly since Maleah has been born, has been unprecedented in my mind. Because I remember when the dance performance that Maleah mentioned first started, I was 14. And so, you know, gosh, that was a lot of years ago, 30 something years ago. And it was so far removed. And so where we've come is absolutely amazing. And so many people are far more hungry to understand, like you were mentioning, Maleah, that anything that we can do to share or invite sharing is really being welcomed now, because it feels like this COVID hit all of us. All of a sudden there was something that we were all in together. Granted, it's like we were in the same storm, we weren't in the same boat. There's some people, especially in Jackson, you know, that we really had a little bubble. We didn't get hit quite like a lot of places in the United States, but nonetheless, the storm that we were all facing was the same. And so it changed the playing field. And that was pretty amazing. And I really look at what is happening right now, and I'm so grateful in a way, because it's bringing out the things that have needed to come out for a long, long time, and creating this amazing group, creating places that people can get to know one another and be in connection and share like this. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for sharing it with us. Because we can talk all we want, but if no one wants to listen, how far do we get? So the most important thing, you know, that we received from all of you is your time to show up today and just be open to a conversation. And, you know, everyone in this group, we can't even express how much we appreciate that. So thank you.
Absolutely. And, you know, it's definitely the exact truth. Nothing can be done without a community. And like my mom was saying, there's definitely been a substantial amount of change in this community. And I know even in my own life, like the high school that I went to, over the 4 years that I was there, I felt like there was an increase in, you know, people with different backgrounds, with different perspectives, who were from different races. And I think seeing that is so incredibly beautiful, but it's the work of the entire community. You know, people who are willing to show up, who are willing to work, who are willing to say that truth. And in opposition of that, people who are willing to hear that truth is equally as important. And, you know, that's what creates strong communities. And I think what we're trying to do here and what we have been doing for so many decades.
Wonderful. Yeah. Let's see if we can get one more question, and then I will be turning the floor over to my co-president, Jay Wallace, for a little closing message.
I think we got one question in the chat.
Wait, let me check. Yes, we do. So Gina Watkins sent a message in that says, community partnerships can increase visibility. Have you approached the local Chamber of Commerce as a supportive partner for events? So I think that's kind of directed at the group. At this moment, I don't think we have contacted them yet. I believe we're very open to doing that. We're just so new right now that we are trying to figure out what it is we want, because I think we're all in agreement. It doesn't make much sense to complain about something if we don't have a goal or an idea of how to fix it. So I think we are trying to really focus up and make a concrete plan of, hey, like maybe we could work on a program, or let's talk about this specific subject and how we can affect it before we go forward with that. But it's definitely going to happen. That's awesome. Thank you, Gina. So again, thank you, Maleah, for sharing your beautiful mind with us and being so unapologetic with just who you are and the way you live and what you want to see happen. I wish there were a lot more people who were of that mindset, you know, because it's very healthy. But it's been wonderful to talk with you.
Well, thank you so much for, you know, everything you do in general, but also, you know, giving a platform and allowing me to speak on the definitely short experiences I've had in my life. But yes, thank you so much. And thank you guys, everyone who came and who listened and who, you know, is hopefully absorbing some of what was said here today.
Awesome. I'm going to turn the time over to Jay Wallace for a little closing message, if we can.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Maleah. Maleah, that was a wonderful talk that you just presented to all of us. It was very much appreciated. You brought out a lot of good points. A few points that I want to touch over. One point that kind of reached out to me was the fact that we do have issues here in Jackson. You know, I like that you touched on that, because living in Jackson, living in this bubble that we call Jackson Hole, right? Sometimes we tend to think that there are not any problems here, right? But that's not the case. That's really not the case. Another thing that I really enjoyed that you touched on was minority representation in our city. You know, we live in a society that prides itself on representing the people, right? But the fact of the matter is how can you claim to represent the people if the people that you represent aren't represented in the governing body of your community? That's something that we really need to think about as we go forward. We also want our city to reflect upon the multiple communities that reside here, you know, not just one community, not just one community's voice being heard, but everybody's voice being heard. I also like that you spoke about being given an outlet for people of color to speak up. That's very important. Outlets, when you give people outlets to speak, wonderful and magnificent things happen. A lot of good things come out of having an outlet to speak up, you know? So I appreciate that as well. This whole movement and this discussion that we're having made me think of some very prophetic words from a very, very famous singer, Sam Cooke. Sam Cooke said, change is gonna come, right? And to be honest with you, change is here, you know? And let's get real, Jackson Hole. Change is already here, right? And we need to jump on board and get on the change train, you know, and stay on it because it's here. Whether, you know, you like it or not, it's here. And we all need to adapt to that change. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank Maleah again for speaking. Thank you, Corey, for mediating the conversation. You both had some very good speaking points, very good questions. Some other things that I'd like to touch on, Teton POC and Allies, we are an organization that is promoting change within our community. We're promoting unity within minority communities. We're promoting, how can I explain it? We are promoting the opportunity for minorities to speak out. We are trying to provide a platform for minorities to speak out, you know, and we invite our white allies to come and help us, because in these turbulent times that we live in, we as minorities can't do it by ourselves. We need our white allies to help us. And we are seeing that every day in this organization, right? And we would love for you all to come and join. Also, like us on Facebook and Instagram. And please share your emails if you would like to be a part of our email list, as well as joining our Facebook. And Alex Tillen, she's posted the PayPal and our Cash App, which are ways to help support our activities and support different community endeavors that we have planned in the future. So if you would like any more information, please feel free to contact one of the Teton POC and Allies, and we will be more than happy to help you out and get you on board. Thank you all so much for coming and attending and looking. So the donations that we receive will help us continue our activities. It will help us to develop our own website. And it also will allow us to complete our nonprofit status that we are working on at the moment. Thank you, Tina, for reminding me of that. If we don't have any more questions, again, thank you all for coming and participating.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great rest of your night.
You too. I can log everybody out from here, I believe. So everyone have a good night. And again, just like Jay said, any help is more than appreciated. We just wanna have a dialogue and see some change. So thanks for your time tonight. Bye.
Thank you.